The number one question I get every single day is this. If XRP is so important to the global financial system, why is the price still here? And I want to give you an honest answer today. Not the comfortable answer. Not the one designed to make you feel good about your back. The real answer. Because something just happened in the background of global finance that most retail investors are completely ignoring. A signal so quiet, so methodical, that by the time it becomes a headline, the positioning will already be done. What I'm about to walk you through is not being discussed on Bloomberg. It is not being explained by the influencers chasing daily candles. And it will directly reshape how you think about what XRP actually is. Let's get into it. Welcome back. This is Crypto Signals, where we don't chase the noise, we decode the structure. Today we are going to dissect one of the most underreported macro developments in digital finance right now, the Federal Reserve's quiet pivot toward tokenized settlement infrastructure, and why it places XRP at the absolute center of what is coming next. Let's start with the hard truth. Most people are watching XRP's price like it is a scoreboard. They see a flat week and they conclude nothing is happening. That is exactly the wrong frame. And here's why. To understand what is really unfolding, you have to understand a term almost nobody in retail crypto talks about: correspondent banking friction. Right now, when a bank in Brazil wants to settle a payment with a bank in Japan, they do not move money directly. They rely on a chain of correspondent banks, each one holding pre-funded accounts in foreign currencies, sitting idle, earning almost nothing, just waiting to be used as a relay. These accounts are called Nostro and Vostro accounts. And according to McKinsey's Global Payments report, the capital locked inside this legacy plumbing exceeds $27 trillion globally. $27 trillion. Frozen, doing nothing, just waiting for a more efficient system to make it obsolete. Now here is where it gets interesting. The Federal Reserve's FedNow system launched in 2023. The Bank for International Settlements, the central bank of central banks, published its Project Nexus framework, explicitly exploring how instant payment systems across different countries could be linked together. And the IMF released its paper on a cross-border payment interoperability layer that openly discussed the need for a neutral bridge asset. Not a government-issued CBDC, not a bank stablecoin, a neutral, pre-existing liquid bridge. Think about what Ripple has been building for the past decade. On-demand liquidity, now rebranded as Ripple Payments, does exactly one thing. It uses XRP as a real-time bridge to eliminate the need for pre-funded Nostro accounts. You don't need idle capital sitting in 47 countries anymore. You source liquidity at the moment of transfer, execute in 3 to 5 seconds, and settle with finality. The global banking establishment is not slowly building toward this vision. They are already demanding it. The infrastructure already exists. And the asset sitting at the center of that infrastructure has been stress-tested in federal court for 3 years and came out the other side legally classified as a non-security in programmatic sales. Most retail investors are staring at the price. Institutional architects are staring at the plumbing. Let me show you the math that the retail crowd consistently ignores. Because this is where the triple-digit whispers actually come from, not from moonboys on Twitter, but from the cold logic of supply and required liquidity. The global foreign exchange market processes $7.5 trillion every single day. That is not annual volume. That is daily. Now, Ripple does not need to capture all of that. Nobody is claiming that. But ask yourself this brutal question. What happens if XRP captures even 1% of daily FX settlement flow? 1% of $7.5 trillion is $75 billion per day. Now think about how a bridge asset actually works. For XRP to move $75 billion per day in liquidity without catastrophic price slippage, the market cap has to be large enough to absorb that flow. Industry-standard liquidity models suggest you need a market cap of roughly 10 to 20 times your daily settlement volume to maintain price stability. Run that math. $75 billion times 10 equals $750 billion in required market cap, divided by 57 billion circulating tokens, the current approximate float after accounting for locked escrow and lost supply. That implies a per token value of over $13. And that is 1% of FX flow. 1%. Now scale it to cross-border B2B payments. The World Bank estimates that market at $150 trillion annually, roughly $410 billion per day. Apply the same 1% scenario and the same liquidity model. The numbers stop looking speculative. They start looking like engineering requirements. Here is the critical piece most analysts miss. Higher token price is not just nice for holders. It is a functional requirement for the system. A cheap XRP means you need to move massive quantities to bridge large transfers, which creates slippage, which breaks the use case. The system only works at scale if the asset has sufficient depth. This is not a Moonboy fantasy. It is a design specification. The math does not need your permission to be true. Fixed supply, 100 billion tokens, approximately 57 billion in circulation. Monthly escrow releases mostly relocked. Exchange reserves, per crypto quant data, sitting near multi-year lows as tokens migrate to cold storage and institutional custody. When demand arrives at infrastructure scale, the supply profile does not flex. The price does. Now let's look at what the smart money is actually doing, because this is where the disconnect between retail sentiment and institutional action becomes almost embarrassing. Ripple acquired Hidden Road Partners, a prime brokerage clearing over $3 trillion in transactions annually in a deal that closed in early 2025. Think about what that acquisition actually signals. A prime brokerage is not a crypto company. It is a bridge between institutional capital markets and execution infrastructure. Ripple did not buy a blockchain startup. They bought a seat at the institutional table. Ask yourself, does a company that is losing a regulatory battle make an acquisition like that? At the same time, Franklin Templeton, a firm managing over $1.5 trillion in assets, has been expanding its tokenized money market fund, Benji, built on public blockchain rails. BlackRock's Biddle Fund tokenized over $500 million in treasuries within months of launch. Fidelity has filed for its own tokenized fund structure. These are not experiments. When a firm like BlackRock commits $500 million to tokenized treasuries, they are not testing the concept. They are installing the foundation. And the foundation they are building requires a cross-chain, cross-currency settlement layer to function at institutional scale. Meanwhile, the Bank of Japan is running live CBDC pilots. The Monetary Authority of Singapore has been expanding Project Guardian, a tokenized asset framework explicitly designed around interoperability. Japan's FSA has issued clearer guidance on digital asset classification than any Western regulator. There is a reason Ripple's ODL volume in Asian corridors has been expanding quietly while the Western press focuses on price charts. The pattern is clear. While retail is arguing about whether XRP is dead, the most credentialed financial institutions on Earth are building the system that needs it. This is not retail FOMO. This is calculated positioning by custodians, prime brokers, and sovereign-backed payment frameworks who have already concluded that the infrastructure question is answered. The only question left is price discovery, and that is a function of when, not if. Now let's talk about the specific triggers that move this from thesis to reality. Because a catalyst without a timeline is just a story. First, the Digital Asset Market Clarity Act. As of mid-2025, this legislation is advancing through congressional committees with bipartisan support. This is not a crypto industry wish list. This is a serious legislative framework that draws a definitive line between digital commodities and securities. Once signed, the regulatory ambiguity that has suppressed institutional inflows for 3 years is formally resolved. Second, XRP spot ETF approvals. Following the precedents set by Bitcoin and Ethereum ETF approvals, multiple asset managers have filed applications for XRP-based spot products. The SEC, operating under a post-Chevron framework with significantly curtailed interpretive authority, faces a very different legal environment than it did during the Ripple lawsuit era. The approval window is not years away. Third, Ripple's stablecoin, Lust, now live and gaining traction across institutional corridors, creates a closed-loop ecosystem. When Lust handles stable value transfer and XRP handles the bridge function, you have a two-asset liquidity architecture that mirrors how traditional FX desks operate, but with settlement finality in seconds rather than days. These are not vague someday catalysts. These are named, dated, structurally predictable events that are converging inside a 12 to 18-month window. The fuse is lit. The question is whether you are watching the flame or still debating whether fire is real. Here is what nobody wants to say out loud, so I will say it. The window for accumulation at current prices is not permanent. It is a function of information asymmetry. Right now, retail sees uncertainty. Institutions see a checklist that is almost complete. The gap between those two perceptions is exactly where opportunity lives, and it closes the moment the checklist becomes public knowledge. Exchange reserves for XRP are near levels not seen since 2020, according to CryptoQuant's on-chain data. That matters. When tokens leave exchanges, they are not available for immediate sale. They are being moved to custody, either personal cold storage or, increasingly, institutional vaults. That is not panic selling. That is positioning. Every day that the narrative stays confused, the strategic accumulation window remains open. Every day the price stays flat, the conviction gap between informed and uninformed holders widens. That gap is not permanent. History shows that when institutional capital finally moves openly into an asset with this utility profile, it does not gradually reprice. It reprices violently, and it does not wait for retail to catch up. The door is not slammed shut, but it is not standing wide open either. So here is how this ends. Not with a single explosive headline, not with a green candle that makes the news, but with a gradual, unstoppable convergence of legal clarity, institutional infrastructure, and mathematical demand that has been building in plain sight for years. XRP is not competing to be the most popular coin. It is not trying to win a retail sentiment poll. It is being engineered into the plumbing of a global financial system that moves $7.5 trillion every single day and has not meaningfully updated its rails since SWIFT launched in 1973. The Nostro accounts will be drained. The correspondent banking chains will be shortened. The $27 trillion sitting frozen in pre-funded foreign accounts will find a more efficient home. That is not a prediction. That is the explicit stated goal of the IMF, the BS, the Bank of Japan, and every major payments infrastructure body currently operating on the planet. The only question is whether you understand that before or after it becomes obvious. Being early in a structural shift feels exactly like being wrong, right up until the moment it doesn't. Stay rational. Stay positioned. The math does not lie, and the system is almost complete. Comment bridge below if you made it to the end. I want to see who actually understands what is being built here. Until next time, stay calm, stay focused.